Well, I think it's important that we kind of notate when this was recorded. So this was recorded on March 29th, Sunday, the 29th. And right now, U.S. death toll in coronavirus has reached 2,000, with over 50,000 cases reported in New York. And we're supposed to be seeing an influx. My understanding is every 6 days it would double is how it's projected. So today we have a guest we've had before. Bruce has agreed to join us to talk over coronavirus. Bruce, what specific aspect are we going to be looking at?
Well, what I was thinking of is people my age, this is now probably about the third major sort of big cultural and social event that we've had to live through. 9/11, the housing crisis, and now this pandemic. And part of me is wondering whether or not people, are now going to take all this information, especially this pandemic, and see if they're going to try to make some big, social changes, economic changes, and see if that's going to lead to us rethinking certain aspects of our society and whether or not we're actually going to make some change this time, or if we're just going to continue with the status quo. And my big question for you guys as the discussion today is this event going to spark people wanting to make big structural changes, or are we just going to cruise past this and just keep doing what we're doing?
Well, let's jump in and take a look.
You're listening to It Might Be Interesting with your hosts, Josh Levy and Jon Walsh.
And special guest, Bruce.
Now, there's an endless amount of information on any given topic, and sometimes you just need somebody to extrapolate it in a way that might be interesting.
So the first question I have for you guys, Josh, Jon, is do you think this event, now that we've lived through 9/11 and the 2008 financial crisis, do you think this event is going to be enough of a wake-up call to people to get big political, social, and economic changes done that in the past, even though there's been a large number of people advocating for these things, still never happened?
I think that events like this motivate groundswells. And I anticipate seeing more civic engagement and better leadership out of Washington as a result of this. My personal feeling is that we will start to see a weariness surrounding partisanship and just a desire for results to finally come about. That's my hope anyway, but I kind of sense it in the air. I don't know about you, Josh. What do you think?
Look, I think, should it spark the change? 100% yes. And I've for a long time said, we're a 21st century country trying to make a 20th century economy work, in a 21st century world and everything. And I think there are going to be some changes. There are going to be like social economic changes that we'll see naturally. Like, for instance, I think there are a ton of companies that were old school, requiring everyone to go in all the time. They're going to realize, like, wait, our employees were working from home and they were just as productive. So why do we have all these offices and everything? And there are going to be some unfortunate downstream effects that are going to affect gig economy workers, things like that down the road. But in terms of sparking the change, the reason I'm hesitant, Bruce and Jon, is, this would also be like the third time in our lifetime where I've said, now things are going to change. It's like every single time I say, there is no way on earth things won't change now. And I think especially as things unravel from the bill that was just passed, and when it starts becoming more and more clear that the working and middle class people, at the time they needed it the most in our lifetime, they got screwed so bad by both parties. Like, they just got so screwed, held hostage for corporate handouts and stuff. So once that unravels, I think what's going to hit the fan, and I just worry that we're at a stage where the change comes in the form of like pitchforks. People are on edge, especially if people get screwed economically and they're struggling with a pandemic on top of it. Like that just is a recipe for some pretty bad thing. I hope not, but what do you think, Bruce? Please help course correct my cynicism here.
I don't think you're looking in the right place to course correct cynicism here. I've come to believe that the most apt metaphor for our current time is Lucy and the football. I sort of feel like we're constantly stuck in this, place where we think change is going to occur. We're very excited about it. We build up hope and change, and as soon as we go to do it, Lucy pulls the football away and we end up flat on our back. And my question is this the time that we actually get it done? There is one episode where Lucy has like a note and she gets it notarized and everything's promising Charlie Brown that this time things will change. But we know that there is lots of people, like this billionaire class and this sort of, elites in society that are going to be fighting really, really hard to make sure that when we come out the other side of this, nothing has changed. Mm-hmm. So I've ended your cynicism.
You haven't ended my optimism, though. I think that a groundswell on both sides has been growing. If you look at the 2008 collapse, you had on the right the Tea Party movement and on the left the Occupy movement. I think that they're going to start seeing a lot more similarities in their point of view rather than differences. And I think that, democracies, free societies tend to rally around the flagpole during these events and put differences aside and say, what is the group that is most effective or affected, and how can we address, systemic problems that led to this? And a lot of what led to this is, people on the front lines of it. And those people are now more affected and probably more willing to participate in civic engagement as a result of this affecting them. So I'm not ruling out anything until, we get past the curve and start to normalize and realize, well, what is it that's important? What is it that makes America America, and how a functioning government works? I think having people in government that are, just there to stake an ideological claim, I hope that goes by the wayside, and that we just look for result-driven politicians.
Yeah, and one thing I'll ask you guys that I've been pondering is, look, we still have a huge portion of government that just serves the donor class. And that's who crafted the bill, held everyone hostage, and that way nobody felt like they could vote against it, because then they'd be accused of voting against, the relief for the American people. And so anyway, you have those, who serve that donor class, and then you do have this populist, movement, people who do want change to happen for the people, and on both sides. Think not President Trump, but the people who voted for him under the guise that he, drained the swamp and everything. But here's the main question is, I believe it can change, but the people on the left and right who do advocate for government to start working for them, they need to come together. And what I recently saw an interview with Steve Bannon on Fox News, and a friend of mine sent it to me. Steve Bannon went on and said, President Trump needs to lay down the hammer, shut everything down, and he said, I don't care what it costs, $2, $3, $5 trillion, send checks to the American people, the working and middle class. Close your eye or read that transcript and you think like, oh, they interviewed AOC. You know what I mean? And it's because he's populist. Like, yeah, on social issues we disagree on a lot of things and whatever. And I think if there was some kind of unity, like between populist left and right, and maybe even before we hit the curve, find a way to let Washington know, like, hey, you're on notice. So when we are over the hump of the curve, you better have some answers ready. But as long as they keep the left and right divided, like we are, um, then it's going to be so much harder.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that other people agree with you as well. Bruce, I'm going to read something out of this article you sent us from Politico. This is a segment from a guy named Eric Kleinberg. He is a professor of sociology and a director of the Institute for Public Knowledge at NYU. I'm just going to skip down to a second paragraph, and he says, when this ends, we will reorient our politics and make substantial new investments in public goods, for health especially, and public services. I don't think we will become less communal. Instead, we will be better able to see how our fates are linked. The cheap burger I eat from a restaurant that denies paid sick leave to its cashiers and kitchen staff makes me more vulnerable to the illness, as does the neighbor who refuses to stay home in a pandemic because our public schools failed to teach him science or critical thinking skills. So I think that we will see a reinvestment in the public good. You know, this idea of limited government is a great philosophical, armchair conversation, but it has no practicality or practical results to point to. And I think the idea of limited government is misconstrued into the idea of no government. And I think that people will see now that what we need is a means for the person on the bottom to, engage their government and get results out of it.
Yeah, I think the beginning of that article said that the current place that we're in comes from a kind of position of luxury. Like we can afford not having a government, be effective at anything. We can stick a reality show TV host in the presidency and not really worry about it, because I think there's a general sense that everything's sort of on autopilot and whoever's in charge doesn't matter anymore. So what you're saying, John, and this is what I agree with, is that the argument that, well, it doesn't matter who's in charge because, nothing matters anymore. It's just politics. It's just a bunch of people playing games up there. I think the general narrative that's been thrown out there is Washington is just a bunch of people, playing games. They're just up there yelling and, posturing and making political points. And, if you listen to what Trump says, that he basically pushes this narrative. That's why he keeps coming out as everything's a hoax, everything's fake news. What he's essentially saying is nothing in politics matters. Everything's a show. Everything's a show, so it doesn't matter what happens. You don't really need to take any of this serious. But something like this, you can't hustle your way out of it. He's trying the best that he can to try to, use his skills as a con artist to try to get through this, to shape the narrative in a way that doesn't place the blame square directly where it belongs, which is at the leadership. And people, it's just the question is whether or not that large percentage of people that didn't think politics mattered, didn't think anything, was going to be a consequence of voting for a reality show TV personality, are going to rethink that position. Are they going to think, okay, sticking this guy in the president's, office turned out to be a disaster. Next time we go to the polls, we need to make sure that the guy at least has a certain minimum level of competency and understanding of, anything, because right now, basic government, the guy doesn't seem to understand basic math. He doesn't understand, exponential growth. He doesn't understand, the germ theory. He doesn't understand basics. All he understands is, the shell game that he's used to playing, and, that's not useful.
And if it's okay if I kind of piggyback on that, like it, all I can think about recently is the the three words that changed the last several decades of politics and American culture, economics, everything, and that was at the Republican convention when Ronald Reagan said, "Government doesn't work." And now you even see people on the right. It was funny. When Andrew Yang first announced he was running for president, they did polls. The biggest, the most favorable poll when they asked people, how do you feel about universal basic income? The best one he got early on was like, I think 22% of people were like, yeah, it's a good idea. And now even like 70% of people who are Fox viewers who responded to the poll were like, yeah, in times of especially like this, it's a good idea. And so anyway, I think people are starting to wake up to the realization that, oh, like there is a place for government. And the argument I give whenever people say, oh, I'm going to be more conscious about where I shop and what they're going to do. It's like, no, that is the wrong thing. We need to stop that mentality, because that mentality is based on what we've been doing since 1980, which is assuming that the free market and that is the solution. In other countries, the only reason that people have like paid sick leave and healthcare isn't because they're, corporations are nicer. It's because their governments have told their businesses, you need to do this. And we're looking to the wrong people to solve this problem. And, I know people are thinking, oh, socialist, whatever. Like, no, there is a specific, function of the free market. And we keep looking more and more to the free market to fulfill these areas, and we're going to hold them accountable. How about we create a system where we hold Washington accountable? That way you can eat at whatever damn restaurant you want without having to check what they're paying their employees and how much sick leave they get. Like, we need to realize, yes, government isn't going to solve everything, of course. Like, that's not their function, just like it's not the private sector's function. We see this right now. Like, the economy is not tanked, it's stopped. It is like, that's what's so strange about it. It's come to a halt, and demand has kind of dried up. Therefore, profits have, and private sector has no idea what to do. I read a story saying, Mark Zuckerberg wants to get involved with finding a cure. It's like, when are we going to stop turning to the private sector and some dude who, what we expect the guy who made the dumbest website in history to solve a pandemic? Like, come on now. He's not gonna, we need to rely in some cases on private sector to step up with supply chain, making these the equipment, masks, things like that. But who's building, essentially hospital wings inside convention centers? The Army Corps of Engineers. Like, government can work if we enable it to, if we hold it to a high standard, if we don't just keep letting things get gutted, FEMA and CDC and all this stuff gutted, and then when we need it, go, oh shoot, what happened? And so anyway, like, we need to get out of this mentality of like, government doesn't work, look to the private sector. Let's shame the company, on Twitter that doesn't give good enough sick leave. No, let's shame the politician who isn't, who keeps just enabling them to screw us over, because then you don't have to worry about that. It shouldn't be your responsibility as an American to do that research. Like, just like you shouldn't have to do the responsibility. You shouldn't have the responsibility of checking to see if the toys you're buying for your kid has lead in it. Like, it's a regulation. It shouldn't be up to you. It should be the onus of that company. So I know that was a bit of a rant.
No, yeah, you're good. I think the thing you're touching on is what the article kind of outlines as well, and it's the phrase that keeps coming up over the past 40 years: social safety net. which has been deteriorating ever since Ronald Reagan got elected. And I'm starting to see, and Bruce, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I'm starting to see a return from both political sides to the idea of a social safety net. If you look in, how this virus is spreading, the one thing that I'm pretty concerned about is rural hospitals. If once they get overrun, you could have mini pandemics in rural areas, and we're going to need a social safety net, across the board for all of this. And in your research or reading, Bruce, are you seeing additional calls for that on both political sides, or is it nestled on one side, or what do you see?
Well, what I'm seeing is there are people now who are saying, look, we've been telling you this for a long time. There are no people in society that are valueless, that don't, deserve the basic, care and support that our society can provide. So there's two competing narratives. One is, we're all just out for ourselves. There's a limited number of rafts and you just need to scramble and get on one. And if you don't, that's your fault. You drown, you're gone, right? And the other narrative is like, look, we're all in this together. There is no individuals. The lie is that if you get onto a raft that you're safe. Well, the bigger story is even those people who ended up on the rafts are now going under, because you can't just let large portions of the society sink, drown, and live in despair and high levels of economic distress, and have the rest of society just go on as usual. And I think that was this idea that we can let large numbers of people in society live just on the edges of collapse, and still have a strong social order. So what this is showing is the government had to step in and save those people, save all the people who are living paycheck to paycheck and on the edge, because, as Josh pointed out, it was going to go to pitchforks if they didn't. Because you can't have a social order in which, a significant part of the population has nothing to lose, right? And we were working under the assumption that it was okay to let large numbers of people basically live right on the edge of collapse. And everything was going to be fine as long as there was still a percentage of people who were doing okay, who, owned homes and stocks and who could retire and all that. And those people were the ones who were keeping the political system alive. But I don't think they're safe from anything. This idea that they were okay, they were on their raft and they were going to be fine, I think, is coming up as a bit of a lie.
So, Josh, you had pointed to the stimulus bill that came out last week, and you found it particularly egregious. What in there set you off the most that you saw Congress act or not act on that enraged you particularly?
Yeah, so I'll say, this was absolutely unacceptable. I've always felt either like a little depressed or angry or whatever. This is the first time I felt like true despair about something I've seen where it was clear. It was made clear by everyone from, Bernie Sanders to Mitt Romney that people needed relief. We needed to get checks in hand, and there was some disagreements on amounts and mean testing, which is absolutely nonsense, which I can go into. But basically, this bill turned into everyone up to $75,000 in income from 2018 will get one $1,200 check that will hopefully arrive within the next 3 months, and that's it. The one check. There's almost $1 trillion in not bailouts, handouts. There's a difference. A bailout usually has strings attached. This is a handout along with over $4 trillion in money allocated to the Treasury for any big business. Keyword big business, corporation, 500 or more employees, to simply request money, say, hey, we're in trouble, like the cruise ship companies that are technically based in the Bahamas. That's where they are tax-based, so they don't have to pay taxes or abide by any employment rules here, so they pay below minimum wage, things like that. They get all this money, but the American people will get one check of $1,200, which for most people doesn't even cover rent for a month. And they're supposed to buy food and groceries. And, I know there's been talk about how, we expanded unemployment benefits and stuff like that. Well, actually, there's the amount is at the discretion of the employer itself, which is hugely problematic considering how many people came from like tip-based jobs like waiter, waitress, as well as gig economy. And let me ask you guys, and let me ask the listeners, put yourself in the boardroom at like Uber. All right? Do you think they are sitting around going, all right, guys, our employees who work so hard for us, our drivers are struggling. Let's figure out the most amount of money we can give them to survive this. Or do you think they're telling their accountants, figure out the least, the bare minimum we have to give up just to skate by, and they'll keep requesting money from the government. And that's the problem, is still, this whole bill is a top-down, supply-side based bill. It is not demand side. We have seen this crisis to me, has made it so crystal clear that the economy is not trickle down. Like, the economy is stopped and businesses are struggling because nobody is shopping. The demand is not there. The supply doesn't mean a thing. There are stores stocked with supply, aren't selling because of the demand. And then, there are some ideas out there about, putting a moratorium on like rent and mortgage payments. No, terrible, stupid idea. You need to get money in the hands of people, because if you do it the other way, then what do you think is going to happen? Like the landlord, the leasing company here, they don't get any money. They have maintenance, they got employees, they got their leases to pay. So what's going to happen at the end of like 6 months? Guess who's going to need a bailout? Them. And the American people are still just sitting begging for scraps. So what you need to do is get that money in the hands of the people. That way the economy, it's like a circulatory system. You can't like cut off blood flow to the heart thinking like, oh, don't worry, we'll add blood at the other side. Like, no, you got to keep it flowing. But there's this assumption that, and it just is so, at a time like this when so many people, low-wage people, are still risking themselves, going to work, making sure the grocery stores are open, making sure that, putting themselves at risk, are considered to be like lazy. Like, oh, if we give them money, they're not going to go to work and they're going to be lazy. And I think, first of all, good. If someone's getting $2,000 a month, that's good incentive for Walmart to start paying them more. Otherwise, you shouldn't go. And but otherwise, like this does nothing.
So I want to talk about $1,200 because I just did the math. Right, that's federal minimum wage.
Yep.
So it's $1,200 a month, which is $600 a paycheck, which breaks down to $750 an hour for an 80-hour work week. And we saw studies for months coming into this about how somebody couldn't live on minimum wage. And now that's the federal response is here's minimum wage at a minimum, So
it's disgusting. And like I said, I mean, even I watched, I follow Robert Reich on YouTube. He has a channel. And, it was so crazy to me to see, like, Robert Reich, he was saying, him and his co-host, he was telling her, like, I don't care, like, when it's the American people and their future at stake, they make the economy run. Without them, like, we are done forever. So whether it's 1 trillion, 5, 10 trillion, get the right amount of money in their hands, if you don't give them enough, then it's absolutely it's going to screw everyone over. I do want some provisions like, that anyone who does miss any payments or anything, if someone's struggling during this time, there should be no effect on their credit score. They shouldn't be screwed over with their credit score. There shouldn't be any interest, taken out. Maybe some loans put a moratorium on, like student loans. But anyway, like he's saying, 5-10 trillion, get the right amount. $2,000, $3,000, whatever it takes for the people. And the same thing was being said by Steve Bannon. And that's why I say we, the people, like we have the ability, the opportunity, and such a strong common ground that we can. I would happily get in a picket line or a protest with a ton of Steve Bannon supporters and everyone who believe that we are getting screwed over by the corporate class and government needs to start caring about us.
What I want to talk about is how this is going to change us geopolitically. We now have a need to see inside China and Iran and North Korea and Russia. We have these countries that are falsifying their statistics on the coronavirus, and they're doing so in such authoritarian terms that it is becoming a larger need to see liberalization of their policies and rules.
No, there's no doubt that nations need to be, more interconnected and more open with each other. In this kind of thing, when I look at it, the model that I think everybody should be following is the model that the scientific community has. Amongst the scientific community, there is always the assumption that you share your data, you don't lie to each other just to spin a narrative or an ideology. It matters to everybody that you have good data and that you're open and transparent with this. And the only thing that was keeping this free flow of, reliable information and data from occurring is politics.
Yeah.
Politics is what gets in the way. People's personal interest in holding power gets in the way. So I would love to see a recommitment to basically say, look, when it comes to things like information sharing for things like pandemics or, these kind of global type issues, we follow this scientific model where the data flows freely. You don't fudge facts, you don't obscure information, you don't hide certain things that are inconvenient to, your own personal agenda. And as long as everybody's open and sharing everything, then we have a clear picture of what's going on. Now, that's, it's idealistic because obviously in places like, North Korea, asking the society there to be completely open and transparent about things is probably a big ask. And so,
but don't you think there's now more leverage to get them to be more compliant in the international community? Don't you think after this, China will even want to see better information coming out of North Korea?
Yeah. I mean, the solution to this, and it's been infuriating for me for a really long time, that the answer to this has always been super duper duper easy. And it is that you always have to pull people in to the network of information sharing and openness. And, the model that we have with some of these is, especially with Iran and North Korea, is isolate, isolate, isolate. But what we've learned over and over and over is that isolating is what allows people, the regimes in Iran and North Korea to stay in power. And that the only thing that's ever going to tear that down is to integrate them, to open. As much as the economies and the societies and the people get integrated into a larger community of people, the scientists get integrated into a scientific community, the people get integrated into a community of people online and knowledge sharing and cultural sharing, the more of these societies have difficulties trying to keep everything contained. And so, hopefully the solution is going forward is not to isolate these things, not to say, hey, what happens in North Korea is their own doing. We just need to cut off supplies and try to starve them, and the problem will solve itself. Because I don't know, we're looking at a model that we tried with Cuba for ages. And it's always frustrating to see people say, no, we always need to clamp, starve them, starve them, starve them. And what you find is that, when Obama tried to open up, more, interchange with Cuba and trying to open up society, there was this sort of gut, visceral reaction to like, no, because that will reward them. It's like, no, it doesn't reward them. It frees them. What it'll eventually do is allow, the doctors, the scientists, the people, and the artists and the musicians to start communicating with the rest of the world. And that'll cause things to crumble faster than any kind of sanctions or isolation ever will.
You've been listening to It Might Be Interesting. Please join us next time.
And we'd love to hear any thoughts, questions, feedback, and even episode suggestions you might have. So if you do have any, please send it over to thoughts@itmightbeinteresting.com. And you can also check out our other episodes at itmightbeinteresting.com.
So, have you seen this thing on Trump directing medical supplies based on how the governor treats him?
Yeah, I
The
can't
Washington
believe it.
Post? I can, but
Well, yeah,
I can't.
yeah,